So I hope you will enjoy these activities. And today's we'll start with a session that has two talks. And I am going to hand it over to the chair who was online earlier. Are you still there?
Yep, I'm still here.
You're still here. So please take over. So that's the problem with this view. I can't see everybody here. So I'll hand it over to you.
So we have two talks this morning on high school and university partnerships. Our first one is from Robert Krakel, who at Stony Brook University, who's going to be talking, or whose talk is titled All Alone, Understanding Physics Teacher Isolation.
Hi, everybody. My name is Robert Krakel. I am a secondary teacher at Manhasset Secondary School in New York, and I'm a researcher, grad student over at Stony Brook University. So today I'm going to present All Alone, Physics Teacher Isolation and Student Performance, a paper that's currently under review with the physical review. Good feedback so far. Co-authored with Dr. Angela Kelly, Dr. Keith Shepard, and Martin Palermo. So who am I? So I'm a full-time physics teacher who teaches 3 courses in AP Physics. I work with 4 other full-time physics teachers. They teach only physics. And my school offers 6 different classes, including a designated extra help course in the schedule and our AP Physics 1 course that runs double period every day or 80 minutes. And so why is this at all important? And it's important because it's really not the standard, especially not in New York. So New York is a fairly large state. For this entire presentation, we're looking at the 2016-17 data that they have out. It's the most complete data set out right now. So there's about 2.7 million students enrolled in the K through 12 school system. Everybody in the state's required to take biology as a graduation requirement, along with 1 credit in a physical science, which can be earth science, chemistry, or physics. The tendency is for people to take earth science, and so chemistry and physics are both considered electives. As an example, in the 16-17 school year, about 250,000 students took living environment or biology, about 150,000 took earth science, about 100,000 took chemistry, and about 50,000 took this form of physics, which is just 1 course. The number's a little bit higher, and we'll cover that in a bit. So for this whole talk, this is the framework that we're working with, physics in the high school context, specifically looking at the workplace tensions of teachers and the equity concerns for students, and the outcome that this has with students actually taking and passing physics or achieving a certain level of understanding of the courses. So we looked at several variables. We created 2 groups, teacher level and school level. And teacher level is the first set that we'll go through. And so teacher level isolation is really the big key factor that popped out that we're looking at. And we defined isolation or an isolated teacher as a teacher who taught physics alone in their school. So they were the only teacher who was actually teaching physics. Professional age was the year since the first certification these teachers received. In New York State, you can receive more than 1 certification in a science. This is not true for all of the US. We also looked at the physics certified. So if they were physics certified or not physics certified. We looked at if they had a primary certification versus secondary. So primary means that they basically did a undergraduate study worth of credits to earn this certification. A secondary study means they did a undergrad in another science and then achieved enough credits to be certified in physics. We also looked at the course types. So if they taught a college prep, if they taught an AP, if they taught mathematics, as well as their course load. So the course load is the percentage of physics in their actual teaching load. So for example, if you had 4 sections of courses and you taught 3 sections of those 4 were physics, your course load would be 75%. Above 50%, you would consider the person basically a full-time physics teacher or most-time physics teacher. School level, we looked at the locale. So if they were urban, like a New York City school, a suburban outside on Long Island, or rural, think farmland, one room, 1 teacher in some cases. The socioeconomic status, so their free and reduced lunch is what we base that on. the 9 through 12 population, so the school size, if it was a large school or small school, we use this as a continuous variable. The physics taking ratio, which was the number of students tested on the standardized state examination. This exam has been running for about 140 years, so it's well built into the system. And it's the number of students who tested in this examination as a proportion of the total number of students in the school. So it gives a sense of the science culture and physics culture in the school. And finally, the percentage of students who pass this examination, this college preparatory course, kind of the standard course, if you will. And so we went and received all this data from SLDS, so State Longitudinal Data Systems. And this is all public data. No Child Left Behind within the United States requires states to take this data. So even though this was done in New York, all of this data should be available for the most part from other states. Now, New York is special in the fact that we have a standardized testing system that all the students have to take, which differentiates it and gives another aspect of measurement. And so we had 4 guiding questions for this. And the first was the extent of professional isolation in New York State for physics teachers. The second was how the performance and contextual characteristics compare among high schools with the isolated and non-isolated faculty in physics. How physics availability, course taking, and physics teaching course load differentiated among these contexts. And finally, the predicting and mediating power of these variables for looking at the physics performance of students, those passing percentages. So in terms of isolated teachers, 40.5% of physics teachers were isolated in New York. There were 641 of them out of the 1,584 physics teachers that we had. Overall, 77% of these teachers were certified in physics. Generally speaking, that's all of the physics teachers. And in terms of the certification of isolated versus non-isolated, the non-isolated teachers tended to have more or be certified more often, so 82.3% versus 69.3% of isolated teachers. So these isolated teachers are not only teaching alone, but for the most part, they don't hold a certification in physics. They may hold certification in another science, and in some cases in mathematics. In terms of the school view, 18.8% of high schools did not offer physics. Nearly 20% of schools in New York did not offer physics. Out of these high schools that did offer physics, roughly 66.8%, 67% only had one physics teacher, right? So almost 70% of the schools that offered physics only had one physics teacher. And in the state, the schools that had non-isolated teachers, so more than one physics teacher, those students passed the state exam at a higher rate than those with only one teacher, with a small effect size. So that's really what we wanted to hone in on, is this passing percentage. But as we said, isolated physics teaching is not on its own. There are other equity factors that played into it that we looked at, and one is the unequal distribution of this. So for example, if you look at this, the number of isolated teachers is roughly the same amongst all 3 locales, with suburban having the least and rural having the most. And additionally, they all have roughly the same amount of schools. However, you can see that the physics teachers count in suburban is much higher than both the urban and the rural, and basically a double the amount of the rural schools, as it were. And you can also see, if we continue with that the amount of students is associated with that. So suburban has the most students enrolled in physics courses. This is for all the physics courses offered. Urban schools had the second most, and rural had the least. In terms of section offered, suburban also offered the most sections. Nearly 2,000 different physics sections were offered, followed by the urban school with about 1,300, and the rural schools with just over 500. Overall, there were 3,804 different sections of physics taught in New York to 78,676 kids. Now, this is all the courses, including AP courses, conceptual physics courses, other physics courses. For the predictive and multivariable models we're going to look at, we're just going to look at the one subset of courses that's the most commonly taken course in physics, the college prep course. In terms of rural schools, the isolation is very, very high. 84.5% of their physics teachers taught in isolation, and this amounted to 93% of their schools being isolated. In terms of certification, urban schools had the lowest amount of certified teachers, then rural schools, and then suburban schools, where suburban schools had 91.3% of their teachers certified rather. In terms of professional age, so again, professional age was just the amount of years since their first certification. Urban schools tended to have the youngest teachers among the three. There was no significant difference between the suburban and rural schools. This is fairly common knowledge that urban schools have a higher turnover rate. What's new here is that isolation may be a factor of that high turnover, along with the out-of-field teaching and the out-of-subject teaching. There was no difference between isolated and non-isolated teachers with respect to professional age, so the average age among both groups was similar. And a good highlight of this is there's actually more novice teachers less than 5 years than there are currently retirees. So the physics, you can see through this graph that the amount of physics teachers has actually been growing compared to leaving. But the flip side to that is there are a lot of novice teachers now that may be teaching in these isolated schools and non-isolated schools. And so the question of mentorship comes up. Multivariable model was run with all the variables before. I did not include them all in this slide, but they're in the associated paper. And so the two main outcomes came from this. Locale was a predictor, socioeconomic status was a predictor, and professional age. So both urban school district and the socioeconomic status were negative predictors, which again, shouldn't be much of a shock to many of us if you've been teaching physics. Rural schools, however, was a positive predictor. And part of the belief is that the isolation or the extent of isolation is so large in rural schools that it's something they may be used to. It may be a cultural sort of identity where their training programs and the students coming from rural schools have an understanding of how the systems work. In addition to that, there may be some self-selecting that's happening there, and it's an area that's going to be explored. Professional age was also a positive predictor, and professional age in this case actually partially mediated the negative relationship between SES and the student achievement, the percentage of students passing, as well as the negative effects of the urban school locales and the student achievement. And so this really highlights that importance of the retention rates in physics, especially among the isolated teachers. So this was all done on the population of isolated teachers, subset of that main database that we were talking about, and this was done on the college preparatory physics course. And so there were a couple limitations to this study. The first is it is a statewide case study. It may not be generalizable. However, this data should be available for each state, so it can be done at each state. Additionally, the United States is broken down into states, and each state controls their educational policy. It's necessary to assume the information from NISED, the New York State Education Department, their database is accurate. However, this data goes through basically a 3 vetting process where the schools check it, then the state checks it, and then it's put out for public scrutiny. The professional age is a proxy for the experience because we simply can't get the data for how long each teacher has been doing it. However, all of this data is census data versus survey data, so it can be tracked and it is vetted. So what this means to us, the teacher prep programs, a couple recommendations that we should look into and may do is we got to prepare the teachers for the challenges in the specific locales and the socioeconomic statuses, right? Urban teachers are going to face different challenges than the suburban teachers. One size doesn't have to fit all. We need to prepare teachers for the content outside of physics because in some cases, a lot of these physics teachers aren't teaching only physics, especially in the urban areas and the rural areas. And we should send the pre-service teachers to some of the suburban schools so they can work with the multitude of teachers, have more teachers to interface with. Mentorship becomes a question for these isolated teachers and as an area should be explored, especially for novice teachers. If they can't receive feedback from someone else in physics, are they really receiving useful feedback? And increasing the physics taking rate. So simply increasing graduation rates and increasing the courses that are offered may increase the physics taking and achievement. So in the future, we're going to look at a couple longitudinal studies of isolation and its growth. We're going to explore the rural schools, as well as examine the collegial interactions among the isolated and non-isolated teachers. And ultimately, we also want to look at the retention rate of these isolated teachers. So you can find all the references, and more importantly, you can contact me for these references if need be. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rob. So first, I just want to give a quick reminder. If you have a question, please click on participants along the bottom of your screen. And then there should be a button just below the participant list to raise your hand. And that's how I'm going to keep track of questions along with a few things I jotted down from the chat. And then the other thing, just please be mindful of, we do have a limited amount of time for questions and discussion. And please be aware of other people who may have questions as well. So with that, it looks like Andres has their hand raised. So if you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert, for this very interesting talk, pointing in my view to some systematic problems that physics teaching at high school level experiences in the United States. And so I have two kind of comments or questions. One is basically a question: what are your thoughts about this major issue of having so few physics courses in general in high school? And that you said in Europe, 20% of students don't even have an option to take physics. To me, if I can use strong language, it's really, it's unforgivable to have an education system like this. But the second issue that I want to raise, maybe this is more to Eric and others than to you specifically, Robert, is we haven't discussed about the issue of when in high school physics is offered. You know, I took my first physics class in 6th grade. That is standard around the world. A little less now, even in Poland, because they're imitating United States too much, unfortunately. That is a major issue that if you start when you are 18 or 17, it's late. It's late to start physics. Anyway, your thoughts or anybody else about this?
So I can tell you at least the science system in the US, and I can talk very much on New York, is a legacy system. So it's been around for, you know, like I said, the test that the students take has been around for 141 years. And it was kind of set in stone around 1910. By 1920, biology became a course, physics became last in the sequence, and it hasn't changed in 100 years. The big problem that occurred was, at least in science education, students were required to take 1 credit for graduation, and that was it. So a lot of students took biology or chemistry, and then almost never made it to physics. That changed when A Nation at Risk came around. Then students were required to take about 3 credits, depending on what state you were in. But depending what state you're in, physics is still mostly taught last, when actually it used to just be taught first. So I can put up, I have a bunch of good articles on this that kind of summarize how that whole kind of process occurred, and the stagnation that we see now is almost entirely, in my opinion, due to graduation requirements and the current unit system that we use in the US.
This could also make a really good open table topic for later this afternoon. And so I've gone ahead and added that to the spreadsheet we're going to use for the agenda for this afternoon.
Awesome.
Creston, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so of course, this was the motivation last year to start organizing this workshop when I looked at that data. And also what Andre say, so I just want to say that I did look at the different physics programs around the world and United States. So it is not so much that we study here less physics. The number of hours actually are the same that one takes physics in Bulgaria, say, and here. The problem is that here is taken in 1 year and that is spread over 4 years in high school. And also, as Andre probably remembers, we had no choice of not taking physics. This credit system is really should not be used until university, I think. High school students have to have a minimum knowledge set before they go in the real world. I mean, it shouldn't be an option not taking physics and taking, something else instead. But so I wanted to ask the following question, though. So one way to think about this issue is that, okay, so we have now online technologies. And while not every person has at home maybe internet, but every school has internet. And I would think, well, why don't we develop courses that students who would like to take physics could take online? But this actually, that's why I want your opinion. It seems that will be in a big friction with the fact that now school principals might choose not to hire physics teachers and say, well, we have an online fantastic course developed by Harvard, by Professor Mazur. Why should we hire a teacher, who, is only an expense for us, and the course can be taken online? So what do you think about this friction with these two things?
So actually, that's a conversation I've been having for the past month with a colleague of mine, because I completely agree. Part of me as a teacher says, why are we not making this more accessible? And then part of me as somebody who's part of a union knows that I would definitely get yelled at and screamed at saying, how could you do this? You're not, implementing the physics teachers. Instead, you're implementing the physics course. And the thought that I had is, that is kind of the rock and the hard place, is how do you implement an online course that can be supervised in class by somebody who is maybe physics certified? And I think what we've really come down to is the fact that since it's not a required course, that's kind of one of the major issues. If it was required, then everybody would take it. In my high school, we've made it required. And so we've grown to have 5 physics teachers that teach full time because everybody takes it. And maybe that is the simple solution is, well, if you have to take it, then we have it. And I think the other issue, like you said, is that we do everything in 1 year, which is, insane to try to teach somebody, basic algebra and then the concept of thermodynamics. It's a little crazy. And I think the biggest issue with this is being able to restructure the whole system. But I think that we are currently in a perfect place to restructure the whole system because we have to, right? We really don't have a choice right now. We're moving towards this virtual world, and maybe that's not an issue. But what is the issue is the teachers who don't want to kind of jump in and build this. They want to keep what they were doing.
So real fast question, sorry for that. In the United States, does every school decide whether the course is required or not, or is it at the district level, or at what level is decided that thing?
So the states mandate the graduation requirements, and normally the graduation requirements is like one life science course and one physical science course. And then it's down basically to the district level that decides you're going to do the state requirements or you're going to do our requirements.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to Margaret Chung, who had also shared a question in the chat. So Margaret, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. One of the things about is a racial issue we haven't been addressing about. A lot of the minorities in urban system is not really due to self-selecting that they choose to live there. It's because of a legacy of housing segregation. So I wonder, how would you address that as part of the factors when you analyze the wealth inequality and also systematic racial factors into the inhomogeneous distribution of the physics teachers? Thank you.
So actually I have, if you message me, I have something that I can send you for this. I can share it with everybody. We actually looked at the subset of urban schools too. And I'm refining a paper on that now. And what we actually found is if you increase the test taking ratio, so if you actually just increase the amount of students taking physics and then taking this exam, as that increased, the amount of students passing also increased. So something that happened in New York, specifically in the urban areas, Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation made this small school movement. So they said these schools are too large. What we have to do is make them smaller so that there's the teacher per student ratio was smaller. So they got more one-on-one time. And what that did in turn is it removed physics from a lot of schools just because they couldn't afford to get these teachers. And so we are actually looking at those specific locales, because I think that there's some things that you can generalize, such as teacher isolation and the effect that has. And then there's some things that you really can't generalize, such as looking at urban schools or looking at rural schools, where you really do have these specific contexts that you have to take a look at. And I think that that's one of the main factors, is you do have these inequities within these specific locales that teachers can be trained for, instead of training a teacher to just go off and be done. So one of the things that we're thinking is when student teachers are going out, some student teachers are going to get trained in an urban school where they only have maybe one other physics teacher that teaches half their load in physics. Instead of doing that, maybe if they get trained in a suburban school with 5 or 6 teachers and build that network and then go into an urban locale, now they have that foundation of other teachers to work with, so they won't feel as isolated, and that might help to improve what is unfortunately happening and not being changed.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left in the Q&A. Terry, it looks like you're up next.
Hey there, since we're short on time, I suppose I'll keep this really brief. I've noticed that my physics enrollment rose when other programs were good at feeding students into me. Whether it was a health occupations class at the first school I worked at, or an engineering program that took off at the school I'm attending right now, that I didn't really see a big boost in my numbers until those things happened. Until our engineering program kicked off, I was the only physics teacher for ages and ages. Our school has 3 now. I'm wondering if you've noticed any other correlation like that. Thanks.
So we haven't looked directly into that, but I can say as an anecdotal thing, working with quite a few people, that's something that we've seen. And I think that really plays with basically every other high school model outside of the US, where you have this multi-year, structuring where the students are learning kind of the basis that they need. So they're not as fearful of taking these classes. I think in the US, students are very fearful of taking physics because since the 1900s, it's been put last because of mathematics, right? That's the big fear, is mathematics. And so there were pushes, for physics first. And I don't necessarily agree that maybe physics first is the right choice. I've seen it done great. I've seen it done, terribly. But I do think that the physics for all, whether that's within engineering or within other classes that feed into it, I think it comes down to physics is really that problem solving mentality versus, that math solving mentality. And I think when that's built within the school, that is the outcome.
I mean, so sorry,
All right.
just one thing.
We're actually out of time.
No,
It is time
I wanted
for.
to suggest something.
It is.
I just want to suggest something.
Okay.
I just want to suggest this is an important topic. Can we use it in the afternoon as one of the things to discuss?
Yes. Yeah, I've put that on the suggestion for topics this afternoon. If someone wants to reword that or focus on a different aspect of that, I think that's exactly what the spreadsheet for picking the topics for this afternoon is meant to do. And as a reminder, you can also post questions for Rob to Slack to be able to continue the conversation there as well. So at 10:40, we will switch to our next talk.
So now we can discuss, in addition, what we want.
Yeah, well, on the schedule, this is a 5-minute break.
Yeah, I know. No, just I was thinking that when humans
but
develop,
if anybody stays, feel free to have a discussion here or go to the congregate table. I mean, this is unstructured time, so
I mean,
to be used as you wish.
I mean, in human development, people develop between 9th and 12th grade, and they should get different complexity of knowledge as they go along. It's not just the whole physics being dumped at them at age 17. I think it makes more sense to complexify more and more as the children develop.
I completely agree. I mean, the biggest problem that we see here, at least in New York, is the graduation requirements. They force the kids to take biology and they force the kids to take normally earth science because they're the easiest to pass. I think to pass the exam, you need like a 40% to get through it, which is just, it's insane that they think that's acceptable. And so, yeah, it's a different mentality that really, in my opinion, ruins education for a lot of kids, especially when you have teachers that come from that same mentality and they go, it's a safe job. Once I'm tenured,
right?
You can't do anything.
But parents should be also enforcers of this. I mean, they want their kids to be successful in the world once they graduate.
But remember, parents have the parents that are now sending kids to schools have been raised and taught in the same schools. So when there was even less physics, so they don't even know that physics is necessary.
Yeah.
And by the way, I completely agree with Creston's comment about development and so on. Also, physics really, as we all know, requires returning to the same topics again. You learn mechanics in some early classes, you think you understand it. Then you take an advanced mechanics course, you realize you don't know anything in mechanics. Then you go to graduate school, and you take Goldstein mechanics, and you realize, my God, I still don't understand anything. You don't learn at one swoop.
Well, can I chime in for a second? Physics is taught throughout school, throughout elementary and middle school. But what is not being said is that, hey, this is a physics communication we're doing right now. So that's not being said. I was substituting for a science class, and I was looking at what I had to discuss that. They said, this is physics, but it's not said that this is physics. So the kids are not hearing, oh, physics. They're not hearing it. All they're hearing is science. So when we start changing the conversation in middle school and high school, then our students will know, yeah, I did some physics in the 5th grade. It was this, and this. Yeah, I didn't know what that. We did a physics topic in the 7th grade. But we as teachers, and I have to be mindful of that as well. We are not saying, hey, what we're discussing today is a physics term. What we're saying is this is science, boom, 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 boom. So I think when we start changing the conversation, then we'll realize that physics is being taught from the time they're in school until the time they get to high school, but no one's having that, no one's saying that in their classes.
Veronica, it's good to say that science is to a large degree physics. In my opinion, it is all physics. But
All physics, that's right.
But it's not, the issue at hand is not a semantic issue. It's not what you call and what you don't call. Many of these, I don't want to generalize, obviously I don't know, but I've seen some, this topic interests me, and I've seen some programs on how science is taught in middle schools. It has nothing to do with physics. It has no experimentation. It has no measurements.
Yes.
Nothing.
They actually do. They actually do physics type experiments in middle school, but it's not called physics. They don't put that particular assignment or that particular lesson that day under the topic physics, but what they're doing in my eyes is physics.
I don't know that
is what.
So I hate to cut this off. There's some really interesting conversation happening, and I certainly hope it continues during the open discussions this afternoon. But it is time for our next speaker. And so I want to go ahead and introduce Miliana Suskavchevich, who is going from Clear Creek High School in Texas, who's going to talk about a study of physics faculty and high school physics teachers' instructional practices, implications for experiential STEM PD model. Sorry about that.
My name is Miliana Shushkavchevich. I'm currently an AP physics instructor in a suburban school district in Houston. And this work that I'm going to present today is about physics faculty professional development experiential model. And this work was done when I was a research faculty at the University of Houston. So the names that you see on the screen are Rebecca Forrest, Wallace Domini, and Andrew Capral, and they were closely involved with this case study where we had professional development collaboration between higher education institution, namely University of Houston, and the area school district. And that professional development was actually targeting high school physics teachers with a goal of transforming and improving the quality of physics instruction at the high school level. But one of the unintended outcomes, so to speak, was actually faculty professional development. So on that note, I'm moving on to the slide where I briefly describe the current state in the physics education research arena. So past decades have seen a tremendous development of instructional materials, pedagogy, curricula that are pretty much research-based and aligned with the current understanding of how people learn and the knowledge of cognitive science. And a lot of effort has been also placed into not only developing materials, but also disseminating them, making them accessible to faculty across the country and internationally, and also doing the physics education research on the effectiveness of these learner-centered strategies at the higher education level. Now, one thing that, however, was not all that didn't follow immediately the actual development of the materials was actually implementing them on a larger scale in the country. So in 2010, there came the study by Dancy and Henderson that pretty much showed a survey research of about 700 plus physics faculty and tapped into their instructional and assessment practices in their undergraduate physics courses. One thing that became obvious was that the faculty did have a lot of knowledge and familiarity with the physics education research, but not so much with trying to implement or do something about that in their own undergraduate courses. There were a couple of exceptional examples. Eric Mazur from Harvard University in his webinar entitled basically Confessions of a Converted Lecturer talked about his own experiences of getting access to the physics education research and trying to do something, trying to transform his courses for pre-med students at Harvard University. But as I said, most of the time, that kind of work is left to the individual faculty and their own willingness to do something to improve the quality of instruction at their own institutions. And just in the past, I would say, decade or so, there was maybe more effort placed into a more targeted way of basically training faculty and improving their teaching practice at the university level. But this case study is not about that. This case study is about actually trying to improve the quality of high school physics by providing a professional development program for about 20 physics teachers in the greater Houston area. And this is actually collaborative work between the University of Houston and the school districts. So the actual program called STEM Teaching Equity Program offered basically the guided inquiry-based instruction to the area school teachers. And the structure of the program was such that they basically met 2 weeks during the summertime, followed by the year-long bi-weekly sessions, 3-hour-long sessions. And at any given basically session, both physics content faculty and physics instructional faculty were present and jointly co-facilitated these sessions for the high school physics teachers. So one of the hypotheses, so with the primary goal in mind, which is improving the quality of high school physics instruction, one of the unintended outcomes was basically that this was a transformative experience for all stakeholders involved in the process, including the college level physics faculty who has active research outside of the physics education, but teaches undergraduate physics courses. And so one of the things that came or emerged while starting this PD for high school physics teachers was that maybe the exposure to the inquiry-based physics program might actually bring some transformation among the physics faculty courses at the undergraduate level. And the expectations were there was no set target. There could have been minor tweaking in their undergraduate courses to maybe some major transformation, like fully inquiry-based physics classrooms. And the goal also would be then that the implementation of these techniques might basically lead to a better learning experience for undergraduate students and maybe potentially decrease the dropout rate among physics students at the undergraduate level. So the model itself, you actually see it on this slide. We call it basically the experiential model for physics faculty professional development. And in this little rectangle, you see the community of practice. Remember, those are the instructional faculty, the physics content faculty. There was also district level administrators, and there were retired physics teachers, and then, of course, the high school physics teachers for which this intervention was intended. And in that community of practice, what happens is that physics faculty, content faculty, basically co-designs the training sessions for high school physics teachers with their instructional counterparts. So there is some kind of a peer mentoring happening at this level. And then within that community of practice, both parties, instructional and content faculty, actually facilitate this learner-centered instruction for high school physics teachers. Now, what's happening outside is that some of these practices might be useful in college level classrooms. So the physics faculty, the content faculty basically tries some of these techniques in their undergraduate physics courses. And so it is an iterative process because learning from what works in college level classrooms might be then fed back and then kind of refined and in another cycle. So this is pretty much that model. I have to mention that it's pretty clear from this presentation that this is not rooted in any kind of empirical research. This was pure observation of what went on while designing training, professional development training for high school physics teachers. And so what we really wanted to do after a year of doing something like this, with the next cohort of teachers and faculty, we wanted actually to do an evaluation study, a case study, where we hired an independent evaluator from, at that time, Rice University, who had a background in both STEM, but also had a background in research and evaluation in social sciences. And we basically charged him with, we would like to basically see what really, how is that participation in teacher professional development actually affecting college level physics classrooms. So the data that he basically suggested and collected was basically classroom observations. He managed to meet 2 or 3 times with each individual faculty that participated and observed their classrooms. He also had the survey of instructional and assessment practices, which was mimicking the survey that was basically described in this Dancy-Henderson study in 2010 with 700 plus instructional faculty, physics faculty from across the country. And lastly, at the end of the semester, our evaluator actually conducted a semi-structured interviews with physics faculty. So basically these sources of data told something about the extent, if any, at which the physics faculty actually implemented some of the practices in their undergraduate level courses. One of the things that I would like to say is that the entire evaluation study is actually available. It's about 20-page document. But one single slide that I'm showing here is basically professors or content faculty cross-referenced with observed instructional strategies. So this is something that the evaluator, the instance of the different pedagogies or instructional practices happening at the undergraduate classrooms by 6 faculty members who that particular year participated in this kind of professional development program. And you see on the left side, lecture to demonstration or interactive lecture demonstration, questioning, discussion, to all the way to the more learner-centered activities to the right. And the instances at which some of these practices have been observed during the classroom observation. So some faculty actually moved completely away from lectures, and they did something that, as Eric Mazou described, flipped classrooms, used the course time to pretty much allow students to debate and discuss what they've read at home, while some other faculty continued with the lectures. Of these 6 faculty, that particular year, only 1 faculty basically pretty much remained with his lecture centered. The rest tried to implement some of the different pedagogical strategies and techniques that they pretty much learned or heard about with this context of the professional development training program for teachers. As I mentioned, the full evaluation study is available with detailed description of the observation techniques. When it comes to the interviews, the evaluator actually looked at the transcript, so he provided a thick description of the interviews, followed by the analysis and interpretation. And some themes that kind of emerged were that, for example, content faculty who was unaware of, for example, the power of prediction started using that more frequently in their undergraduate courses. So asking students to predict what's going to happen rather than just telling students. That was one of the big themes. Also, more interactive lecture demonstrations, questioning, and not only questioning, posing the question, just one raised hand answering the question, but more questioning so that it opens dialogue between students in the classroom. And interactive lecture demonstrations came across. Another thing, that big theme that kind of resulted from this evaluation study was like, what are the barriers to implementing some of the pedagogies and strategies and more learner-centered strategies in undergraduate level courses, where basically time constraints, facilities, class size, students' attendance, and sometimes even high school physics background, So the time has been apparently the number one limitation. The need to cover a breadth and depth of material in a short period of time. The faculty saw that as one of the biggest barriers to using more inquiry-based strategies in their undergraduate level physics classrooms. So with this in mind, I would just basically say that if you look at this work, one of the something that kind of distinguishes, something that separates this from some other studies is that the physics faculty who was otherwise not so aware of the physics education research efforts, by working or teaming up with the instructional faculties, managed to actually more conscientiously try to implement some of these techniques in their undergraduate level physics courses. And this novel approach to physics faculty professional development lays foundation for the experiential model of professional development, which could maybe later be empirically tested in a larger number of sites in the physics department, or maybe even across the STEM disciplines. So I would like to kind of finish or complete this little presentation by saying that after 3 years, some faculty basically became so inspired that they decided to dedicate separate sections of the course to purely doing inquiry-based work, like Lillian McDermott's tutorials and physics by inquiry. That was one of the things. Also, I would also like to say that some of the physics faculty across at our institution became more knowledgeable about the works of physics education researchers across the country. Okay. Any questions, answers?
All right, and Miliana, you had requested just a minute or two to follow up, and then we'll move on to questions.
Okay, it's pretty painful watching yourself talk, and I decided while watching myself, I'm removing word basically from my vocabulary altogether. So there is no basically in my vocabulary. Anyway, joke on aside, I'd like to say that this work was presented at one of the sectional AAPT meetings, and the names that were on the presentation were those that kind of talked about what's going to be the content. But as Margaret Chung pointed out, she's one of the co-PIs on the original proposal, which Wallace Dominic, Rebecca Forrest, and she put together. And I think she was instrumental in bringing or kind of working with physics faculty from the University of Houston to participate in the professional development training of teachers. So I think in that respect, this program is truly unique. I mean, we had about 10 faculty members committing to work with high school physics teachers in order to improve the instruction at the high school level. And the incentive for doing that, among many others, I think the most important is to get better quality students in higher education, in physics program at the U of H. So with that, I know that this seminar has many both teachers and also faculty who were involved in the STEP program. So anybody is of course welcome to comment to any questions that we might have from the audience. That's my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Isa, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you. So the first thing I wanted to say is just to comment both about this talk and the previous talk. And it strikes me that, you know, Rob, when I was listening to you speak, it really provided like the motivation and the inspiration for why we're doing this, like this idea of isolation. And then with this talk recently, it kind of struck me that it was kind of like a roadmap or a how-to about how to foster productive relationships between somebody like me, physics education researcher, who's really interested about implementing useful, practical, impactful changes in the high school physics classroom. So my question is, what are your perceptions of or what do you think are the challenges when you come across this perception that higher ed or researchers are coming into the classroom and are telling knowledgeable teachers with practice who know their students how to teach? Like how can physics education researchers build trust, you know, and what can we do to express and be respectful of the knowledge that is in the classroom, and how do we amplify that?
The question is for me, or?
Yes, to you.
Thank you. So after almost 20 years in higher education and being involved in educational research, following what's going on nationally, last 4 years, I was actually a classroom physics teacher, teaching mainly AP physics courses. And it's two different worlds. I think sometimes people in academia see these ideal conditions when once you're in the real classroom, it's a matter of survival. Literally, and this is not a complaint, but those of you who know that sometimes you teach 3 different programs, you meet between 150 to 180 students daily, which is the reality of a high school kind of, when you're kind of so many bureaucratic demands, so much. So somehow, I mean, we had opportunities as physics teachers to write grant proposals to improve, but you don't have the time if you want to be good at what you're doing. And so it's really interesting now your question about how do you bridge higher education, because we are talking about 1 or 2 year difference between students who are in high school and coming to college. And yet these are 2 vastly different worlds. I think programs like this, some kind of vertical alignment between K-12 and higher education, some kind of conversations when you bring together physics teachers and researchers can basically pave this pathway to better understanding of both sides. And researchers could definitely generate some useful information how to be more effective, but that requires better understanding of what's going on a daily basis at the high school level. But I think these programs certainly, just like what you're doing right now in Harvard, is one thing to bring those dialogues together, and these 2 worlds kind of bridge the gap. Not sure if it's...
Clay, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Who are you calling? Calling Margaret?
Clay.
Clay.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, I had a question about how you enticed high school teachers to come bi-weekly for 3 hours an evening. Were they getting some extra money or some really good desserts, or how did you get them to participate? Because I'm having issues getting people to participate in professional development that we run, and on a much less often basis.
Okay, I can answer, but then anybody currently supervising or working with a project can certainly add to that. But I know that there are so many, you would be very surprised, but teachers would travel like 50, 60 miles to actually participate in the program. First of all, the program is well designed. They get a lot of support from they get materials and resources. They do the activities that they can directly implement in their classrooms. So the program is designed in such a way that is very much aligned with what they do on a daily basis in a classroom. So they see direct benefit. We're going to try this. We're going to do this at a professional development level. We're going to get materials and resources that we need to be more effective in the classroom. And I think there was a stipend at the time. There was minor stipend, but I don't think, and you can certainly, there are participants in the program currently here listening to this, and if I'm inviting any of you, both Rebecca, Margaret, I think I've seen Janie, Adela yesterday. If you're welcome to kind of comment more on what is the incentive for
catch up with that. Sorry to hijack this. Yes, we indeed pay the teachers stipend, and also it's very important, and also to get the credit that they needed to renew their professional development, and that is important. We work with the master teachers, superintendent from HISD and Pasadena ISD. Those are high need, historically underserved districts that usually just are quite poor and can't really pay or hire physics teachers. And we also, a very important part is to give them boxes of materials. Those are very cheap. So it's not like you need thousands of dollars, very cheap, that they can just bring it to their classroom worksheets. And also we use the resources to buy Vineyard's tool sets, and those are very expensive, thousands of dollars, but we have that like in UH, so they can actually borrow. So it's like a co-op system. So whoever wants it, they can come in and borrow for a few weeks and come back and teachers share. So we have a kind of sharing community that help with bridging content. And one of the things I wanted to address, sorry, I hijacked this one. I wanted to make sure that UH is a minority serving institute. And it's very important. It's because most of our students are actually people of color, Hispanic and African American. So, and then they predominantly come from those underserved minority high schools, because the students with high performance, they go to UT, A&M, go to Rice. So the students in the middle, they come to us. So when I and Rebecca taught introductory physics, we were surprised and appalled by the fact that although they are very good students, but they never took any physics classes. So that is a motivation for us to develop the STEP program, is to bring equity, okay? We can't really help these students. They're good in math, they can solve equations, but just have never seen physics before. So that's why we started this program, working with teachers, mostly from underserved prepared schools, to give them pedagogies, to give them materials so they can teach their own students. And one thing is very important, I think, is once we learn that, we realize we can, because we work with teachers in modules, we break the content in modules, in TEKs. So we realized that we can pinpoint what exactly that the students in my class are missing by have this crosstalk between high school teachers and college physics. One thing that's very important is the minus sign, because they have no idea that minus can be a vector or minus can be a scalar. And so as a result, the students just messed up with all the minus sign throughout the introductory physics classes, because they have no idea when to do vector additions. And one just simply say is minus 10 degrees. So we use this physics inquiry, and then they can realize, oh, minus sign represents a change of direction, and that helped them to solve and pass this class. So that's why we have this evaluation in college physics professors, is because once we identify what are those blocks that the students have trouble with, we focus on these concepts, teaching them what exactly they need to know in order to succeed. So Rebecca and I, we develop inquiry-based college courses specifically for the students to address this content knowledge. However, we have everything the same, homework, exam the same. Our passing rate, we have 3-fold passing rate than any lecture-based classes. So this is something that we would love to share with a lot of the faculty member, and it's a very effective way to bring equity to minority students. Thank you.
We have about 1 minute left. Maksuda, would you like to ask your question? Maksuda?
Yes, I have a question.
Nikolai, there's actually quite a few people with hands up, and I think Maksuda is about to ask hers.
I have a question.
So mine is not so much a question. Well, it's a combination, it's a question and comment. I was a physics teacher who did the STEP program. So I can say one of the biggest incentives probably was the fact that, as they were saying, like I learned something today. Whatever instruments I used there were the same instruments I got in my package, which meant it wasn't I'm learning this now and then going into the classroom and thinking, how do I improvise this to fit the classroom? It was literally geared towards the classroom itself, not just giving us the knowledge of, oh, this is the physics knowledge you need to be able to teach them, but here's the material to be able to immediately implement. So great job with the STEP. Like, I will accept that I was forced to go there. My colleague took me, but it was one of the best decisions I made. Will STEP be coming back? Yes.
Maksuda, I just would like to comment. I didn't have the pleasure of seeing you as a participant, but I can imagine what you're saying. Thank you for saying that. And
it was just brilliant. Is there a STEP for other sciences, and is this going to come back so we can take some more colleagues to actually get better at? And will it be done at a national level? Is it possible to like take this national?
I hope so. STEP was, unfortunately, there's no funding to continue after 2 years ago. So I was hoping maybe this, Kristan is here, maybe we can think, Kristan can think about some program can, you know, amplify this to a national level.
That's the idea.
Thank you, Kristan.
Awesome.
So that does end our official time for this. So thank you very much.